Hello there everyone and welcome back to my channel. Thank you very much for joining me today. Now with today's video I thought I'd do something a little bit more generalised for Dissidia than usual. It's not going to be like a weekly thing, but I get a lot of questions asking me for advice on how people should build their teams, how people should be pulling, how people should be coming at various chaos fights, things like that. So I thought today I would make a video on a general kind of life hacks and tips and tricks video for Dissidia, because a lot of this stuff may be fairly obvious to some players, but obviously I get asked these questions quite a lot, so I thought, well, you know, by presenting everything in one fell place, while also providing a bit of advice when it comes to pulls and things like that, that should hopefully help even veteran players, you can kind of navigate your way through the game just that little bit more easily. So if that's something that you're interested in, then of course stay tuned and keep on watching. Before we get started with all the tips and tricks and life hacks and all that good stuff, I'd like to invite you guys to have a look at the social media links in the description box below, including my Twitter, my Discord, and my Twitch channel, which I've been streaming literally every day for the last couple of weeks as we're all in quarantine, etc. And I'd like to try and do my part to keeping everybody entertained as best I can. I actually have a big old stream, thanks to the kindness of my viewers, to do a big old stream for Final Fantasy VII and one for Final Fantasy XIV over the next couple of weeks. So be sure to come and join in with that and join in with the fun as well. I've tried to make sure that I stall my FF7 stream so that people who are playing it on day one aren't necessarily going to come and watch it, but people can come on day two, so that's why I've done it on the Saturday instead of the Friday. And of course, don't forget to check out my Patreon page as well. Honestly, you guys have been so supportive with Patreon and over the past couple of weeks, and I'm so thankful for it. Because, as I said, we're all like kind of going through it right now with the virus and isolation and all that stuff, so I'm extremely thankful. And I'm really enjoying making all these title cards for people and giving them something that they can share on social media, etc. So definitely keep it coming. It's been really, really lovely. And of course, every video I shout out one of my random patrons, and this time around that's going to be Zerilius, who is also a content creator for Opera Omnia. I've actually been getting a lot of support from other Opera Omnia content creators, which is absolutely amazing. So thank you ever so much for that. And of course, speaking of those content creators, be sure to check out all of the links or all of the names that you see on the screen right now, so that those guys can appreciate your subs, your likes, your follows, all that good stuff just as much as me. So these first few tricks I'm going to talk about actually have to do with setting up for a fight before you go into the fight. And the first thing that I want to mention is the summons. So when it comes to the summons themselves, a lot of people tend to just take Shiva, Ifrit or Brothers and be done with it. But honestly, you kind of have to look at what your actual team composition requires from a summon before you go into using it. So for a co-op, for example, if it's a particularly long co-op, you might want something that functions a little bit quicker than Ifrit or Shiva, so you may want to take Sylph with you or Chocobo. If you're using characters like Lael or Tifa, characters that use a lot of launches in their kits, then Pandemonium might actually be worth using. If you're using characters that capitalize on sort of speed and things like that, like Sephiroth, then maybe Leviathan is something that you might want to look at. I mean, recently we had an Abyss event which encouraged the enemies to have extra speed, so Leviathan can actually be really useful for that. Not only that, but you can also take elemental resistances and weaknesses into account before you take a summon with you. So if an enemy resists fire, so you don't really want to take Ifrit, but you still want an attack boost, then take Shiva. Don't just take a summon blindly for its stat buffs and not really consider what it can do for you. Because if you take a fire resistant enemy on and take Ifrit, during that summon period where you have the free turns, you're not going to deal nearly as much damage as you could if you were taking something that even had neutral damage. So that's something to bear in mind. Ramuh looks relatively useless in comparison to some of the other summons when it comes to its stat buffs and things like that, because it buffs defense. But it does still boost max bravery at level 30, so you may want to consider using him in something that's weak to thunder or resistant to certain other things like earth if you wanted to use Brothers. There are alternatives to use with every single summon that you can use. Even Bahamut still has his place occasionally, because he can increase your damage output pretty heavily. But at this point we're looking at kind of using the level 30 summons as much as possible, but all I'm saying is that there is a good reason to look at all of the summons across the board when it comes to coming into a particularly difficult fight. So if something's not necessarily working, perhaps consider changing the summon that you're using. The next point I want to come across when it comes to sort of preparing for difficult fights is actually something that should really be very obvious to everybody. As tedious as it is, I get so many people who ask me for help when it comes to a chaos fight or something like that, who show me their team and they haven't done the summon boards. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because I want to show you guys the comparison between a character that doesn't have its summon boards done and a character that does. Now, I want you to have a look at the Camlanaut that I have here, which is actually my Camlanaut, and I took photos of this. I actually put power stones into my Camlanaut's EX just so that I could show you guys this. But look at his attack stat. So without summon boards, it's 2,815. With 6 summon boards done, it's 3,247. That is a almost 400 attack difference. So we're talking like 20 to 30% in increased damage. So his max bravery is gone up by 1100, which is massive when you think about the different percentages that different buffs put onto him. It's actually a really big difference. The same can also be said for artifacts as well. So if you look at artifacts, max bravery plus 330 and attack plus 108 doesn't actually sound like all that much, but honestly the difference between a character that doesn't have its artifacts or its summon boards done and a character that has both of them done is actually really quite staggering. So before you go looking for help when it comes to any chaos fight or anything like that, just look at your team and think, have I gotten the most out of these characters as I possibly can? Have I performed the summon board? Have I performed the artifacts? Can I get any more out of this character? I can also show you another example here with my Penelo, which I took photos of before and after I did the summon boards. Again, look at the difference between her attack stat, look at the difference between her max bravery, her initial bravery. Her initial bravery is 700 different, when from 3,500 to 4,200 is actually really quite a big jump. And then Leviathan giving her extra health, like her HP goes from 8,900 to 11,900. That is 3,000 HP difference. So honestly, if you're not sure about where to go with sort of like how to make your character slightly better, this is actually just the summon boards as well. I haven't even factored in artifacts here. So if you look at the difference between what you can do without those things and then with them, just go and do them. I know it's a little bit tedious, and I know it's probably the most uninteresting thing to do in Opera Omnia, but it really does make a difference if you're struggling. The next thing I want to talk about when it comes to preparing for a long or difficult fight when it comes to Opera Omnia is the enemies tab before you start going and picking a friend unit. Use it. Because a lot of people actually don't. They kind of just go in blind and they kind of think that things are going to happen. But honestly, the amount of time you can save yourself by actually properly researching the things that you're coming up against. And on my left here, you can see that I'm using Dimensions End Entropy 8 here as an example. By looking through all of the character or all of the enemies that you're expecting to face, you can see that they are all immune, or they all have a high resistance to ranged. So if you look at that, you can look at it and go, okay, well, I'm not going to bring a character like Aranea here because most of her kit is ranged, so therefore she's not going to be very good here. And then they're also immune to speed down, so you're not going to take a character that inflicts speed down on the enemies. Honestly, it sounds like such a typical, boring, mundane thing to look at, but honestly, if you're not going to do research outside of the game, like look at Reddit, look at previous videos from like the JP version of the game, which I do also encourage you to do. I do it all the time when it comes to researching for my videos. You can easily look up content to see what an enemy is going to do, what its attack patterns are going to be. You can look at all of these things, and the game actually does tell you what all of their attacks are as well. So if you're not sure what you're coming up against, so you know, you can look at the fact that the Humbarbers within the Dimensions End Entropy 8 do delay through Humbarber Breath. They do a lot of ranged HP, Brave HP attacks. You can look at all these different things that these enemies can do that you're not necessarily preparing for, and then reevaluate the team that you're bringing in, the summon that you're bringing in, the friend unit that you're bringing in. Trust me, bringing a friend unit in, the reason it's really useful to not just have a list full of Araneas and to vary the different friend units that you can have is so that you can cater to different things. Obviously with Dimensions End you can't bring a friend unit, so in this particular case it's a moot point. But when you're going into a chaos fight where you can bring one, do your research into the enemies that you're about to go into so you know which friend unit, you know which summon that you're going to be taking before you go into it, as opposed to going in blind, getting beaten, and then feeling sort of disheartened by it. But equally, as much as I say all this stuff, there's nothing wrong with losing at these events either. All that happens is you just go back and try again. So basically this is kind of a 2-in-1 tip, if you will. So like, make sure you do the research on the enemies beforehand, but also don't be afraid of losing. Now these next couple of tips are actually to do with like how to use your resources, what banners you should be pulling on, how realistically you should be spending your gems and your tickets. Now, I have done a massive video on future pulls twice now, and those I have said at the beginning of those videos that they are inclined as to things that I personally want to pull on and things that I think are worthwhile. However, you should be tailoring those videos and any other videos that you might see to your own needs. And what I want to point out as a tip for you, or a life hack if you like, is that you should be pulling based on Dimensions End, or really whatever, I mean, to extend it beyond this point in time in the timeline of the game, whatever the most difficult content is in the game at this point in time. The reason I say that is because there is no point in pulling for another damage dealer if you're not going to use them. Like, so Dimensions End, for example, it wants you to use different characters each time you go into it. So if you've already used all of your support characters in tiers 1 through 5, you can't then go into a fight with no support characters whatsoever. So realistically, the next banner that you should be looking at when it comes to what should I be pulling on is whichever character fills that role best for you. Now, usually when a month comes around with a Dimensions End in it, a lot of the kind of mechanics tend to be catered around characters of that month, but there are characters that are useful for multiple Dimensions End events. I plan to use Rosa for Dimensions End number 9, despite the fact that I could have used her much earlier because she came out a few months ago. Ishtola is a fantastic character to use across many different events. There's lots of characters that you can use, and you can see through the example of the characters that I've used on the left here for each Dimensions End tier that's been released thus far, that realistically what you should be pulling for is whichever gaps need filling. So look at the roles and things that you're going to be pulling on. I have actually mentioned this before in a much older video, but try and differentiate between physical damage dealing, magic damage dealing, support, so through buffing, support through debuffing, brave battery, healing. There's lots of different kind of roles that your character should be taking on, and using those characters to tackle Dimensions End or whatever the hardest content is at the time of whenever you're wanting to pull for something should be where you're aiming your pulls towards. Equally, when it comes to pulling on any banners or anything like that, the next thing that you should be looking at after you've figured out which characters it is you actually want to pull on is pull based on the number of ingots and books you have available to you. There is little to no point in pulling on a character if you don't plan to realise their weapon and carry it all the way through to its maximum potential. If you don't have any ingots, why are you pulling? There's no point in pulling for something without having a reason to do so. If it's a favourite character and you want to realise their weapon all the way, that's absolutely fine, you can do that. But you don't expect to be able to do 6 or 7 characters within a month because the resources in the game just aren't there for you to do so. If you're able to sort of purchase ingots with real-time money or purchase things like that, so then obviously your options are going to be a little bit more varied than most people. But if you want to not have to do that, then you need to be stringent on which characters you plan to use books and ingots on. So, for example, if you've already decided you're wanting to pull on a physical damage dealer, a healer, and a tank for the month, then those 3 roles will carry you for the Dimensions End for that month, but equally they're probably going to take up the majority of your ingots in your books for that month. So why then pull for 7 or 8 characters outside of collection purposes if you don't plan to use the character? Because a EX character without a realization now is not going to carry you through any chaos mission, or very rarely at the very best of things. And we've obviously got so many things coming up that you can plan ahead, and you can look back on some of the future pull videos, things like that, so that you can plan ahead for yourself. Planning ahead for where your resources, not just your gems and tickets, but also your books and your ingots, should really be a priority. So plan where your ingots are going to go and pull based on that. For example, in this month of April, I plan to pull for Leo. Why then should I then go and put ingots into characters that aren't Leo if it means that I'm not going to have enough resources to put them into him? So therefore, I want to not pull on characters like Fran and Ash, or Exdeath and Gilgamesh, although I already had Gilgamesh EX, and funnily enough, it's actually a thing in my stream to see if I might actually purple Gilgamesh, but this is beside the point, and it's actually a relatively bad idea. It's just something funny that I want to do. So basically, just pull based on where you want your team to go. What is your team's aim? Is it to clear Dimensions End? Is it to clear something new? So therefore, you should be able to map out where your resources are going to go in any given month, and it will help you save. Not only will it help you get the correct characters for what you need, but it will help you save resources in the long run as well. The next tip I have in mind is for you to consider picking up a character who is useful for auto farming. Now, currently, there are two main candidates that I can think of, one of which I have invested in and I have not looked back since, and she's actually available within the EX shop. So if you have pretty much all of the characters that you would want from an EX shop, then this is perhaps something that you might want to consider. But Yuna and Lan and Rain are the two characters that come to mind, and as the time progresses, more characters will come around that will be useful for this. But a character that has an HP plus ability that inflicts AoE, Brave, and HP damage from just the beginning of the fight. So with Yuna in particular, who is the example I'll use, as she's the character that I use myself, she comes in with Valor Force Favour. So she comes in with Valor Force straight away, and her HP attack plus is Energy Ray, which is a Brave, AoE Brave plus HP attack. Honestly, just being able to play auto when it comes to using any of these characters will save you so much time and hassle in the long run that it's honestly just a really useful thing to have. I would only suggest doing this if you have a surplus of materials that you can use for these characters. So if you've got the ingots, because Yuna does need 3 out of 3, Lan and Rain actually only need 1. So if you have Lan and Rain EX, they're actually very good for this. But you may want to consider investing in an auto farm character because it takes so much of the hassle out of crystal farming, gil farming, artifact farming. But a lot of people sort of have read me to filth for kind of investing in a character like Yuna. I actually have used her in Dimensions End for what it's worth, but my primary function to have her is just to make my life that much easier when it comes to farming and take some of the tedium away from doing so. The last thing that I want to talk about with regards to pulling advice or anything like that is the concept of sunk cost fallacy. Now, we've all fallen into this trap. I know I have many times, but it's a piece of advice that I will tell you to do as I say, not as I do, as it were. But if you invest some resources into a banner that you kind of want something on and you don't get it, it's okay to pull away from that banner. You don't have to go all in and pity that character because you think, oh, but I've spent this much resources on it already and I come away with nothing, so I have to come away with something. That is the mentality that will lead into very dangerous behavior generally when it comes to anything gacha, gambling, anything like that related. You have to be very, very careful. But you know, kind of set yourselves limits when it comes to pulling. So like, if I've gone into Seymour and Papalymo's banner, and I kind of thought, I'd kind of like to get Seymour. I'm not going to use him, but I kind of like to have him because he's part of a villain collection. So I sunk maybe 25, 50 tickets into it. I got Papalymo EX, but I didn't get Seymour. So at that point, should I keep going? No, because Seymour is not a usable character, and there are much, much better uses of my resources. So I have pulled away from it. Has my villain collection now been a bit broken? Yeah, unfortunately it has been. But in the grand scheme of the game, it doesn't matter. Losing a few tickets is much better than dropping 75,000 gems on a character that you don't actually care about all that much. I've done it myself, and I've seen many, many people do it, and people have sent me messages saying like, oh, I have this character, I put all this into it, what should I do with it? You can advise somebody so much, but just remember the concept of sunk cost fallacy. It's not a real thing. If you come away with minus 25, 50 tickets, 5,000 gems, 10,000 gems, it's still better than 15,000 gems, 30,000 gems, 200 tickets, 50,000 gems, a full pity. It's still better than that. So just be able to kind of look at a banner and go, do I really need this? Do I have the ingots to put into this? Am I going to use this character in high difficulty content? No? Then walk away. Now, the last two things that I want to talk about before I end the video are actually to do with combat itself. And again, some of these may seem fairly obvious to veteran players, but a lot of people are actually kind of unaware of these sorts of things that you can do. So the first thing I want to talk about is turn order. So when it comes to using certain abilities that talk about having low action delay, what that tends to mean is like their turn tends to come a bit earlier than it would have done normally by just pressing attack or a different skill. So what you can do is you can hover by holding by sort of long pressing on your ability, and it will tell you whereabouts in the turn order your next turn will come. So a good example of this is Y'shtola. After she uses stone, she has a low action delay. So sometimes if you're not looking at the turn order or where her turn order is going to go, you make all these plans for what your turns are going to look like, and then suddenly Y'shtola's jumped forward and it's changed your plans. Well, if you long press on a character or on a skill that you're about to use, it will tell you whereabouts their next turn is going to lie. Now, don't rely on this too heavily, because there have been times where I've done this and then the turn order hasn't quite gone to the plan that it says it's going to give you. But equally, having that extra bit of insight does tend to help, and the number of times where I've kind of long pressed on every skill, like you might have seen it during my Chaos Roundups or anything like that, long pressing on each skill and just saying, okay, well, where does my turn order go after using each and every one of these skills, it does help quite a lot. So you may want to consider just, not every turn, but certainly on characters where you're like, how can I try and jump forward, like when a situation looks hopeless, like, oh, they're about to use this dirty great HP attack. Perhaps using a skill that has a low action delay and actually knowing where your next turn is going to fall on that line will help you actually quite a great deal. And then the last kind of tip, trick, life hack, whatever you want to call it, that I'm going to talk about with this game is breaking. Now, we all know that breaking an enemy will set its turn back, well, like one turn, and take a lot of it, take its bravery, make it so that it can be critical damaged in all ways. But what people don't necessarily take into account is A, how long it takes for them to unbreak, and B, what to do when there are multiple enemies on board. So, let's say we have character A and character B. If A is going for before B, which of the two enemies are you going to want to break? Usually, it's going to be B you'll want to break first. The reason for that is because their turn will then jump back one, so that your character then jumps forward one, and then if you break A afterwards, then that character will then jump back one, and then your character will jump forward to replace it. Whereas if you do it the other way around, all that will happen is that A will overtake B, and then B will overtake A again. So you've actually not changed the turn order at all. So when you're looking at multiple enemies at the same time, be mindful of which character you're going to break first, or which enemy you're going to break first, how you're going to break them. So if you're using an AoE attack, then perhaps consider like which of the two enemies is going to get broken first if they have differing bravery values, because that will actually make quite a big impact. And also, it's also very important to consider when an enemy is going to unbreak itself. Now, an enemy will unbreak itself 5 turns after it's been broken, usually. Unless there's a skill or something that it will use to increase its bravery straight away. But usually, it will be 5 turns across the entire board until an enemy unbreaks itself. So what does that actually mean in terms of strategy? Well, you can manipulate your turns to make it so that the next time that you get to act, or the next time that your enemy gets to act, isn't until after they've unbroken themselves, because if they're unbroken, it means you can break them again. So it means that if you wait for 5 turns, you can then set their turn back another turn by using a strong bravery attack. Now, what can you do to kind of make it so that that happens? Well, every character that's level 70 has a level 65 active ability that always is an immediate turn. It's like it doesn't take a turn on the turn count. You get your next turn straight after it. And a lot of these characters sometimes have quite lackluster level 65 abilities, but they're still useful, because what happens is that's one more turn closer to the enemy unbreaking itself. Characters like Vayne perform so well because they take so many of their extra turns, so that enemies just unbreak before he's even finished attacking, and therefore he can just break them again. Not only that, but he has the ability to re-break them on command, so that their turn delay just gets further and further and further back. So when you're using a character like him, bear in mind how long it's been and since the character was last broken. Obviously, if you re-break a character, that counter is reset, so do bear that in mind, particularly with characters like Vayne. But just try and manipulate the turn order so that it benefits you in the best way possible. So that's going to be it for this video. I hope that all of the stuff that I've listed out here is actually helpful to you, whether you be a new player, an intermediate player, or even an advanced player. I hope that at least something that I've said in this video today will give you something to go away with and think about when you're next approaching some difficult content, or maybe approaching how you want to pull for a character, or where your resources need to go next. So hopefully that will give you something to think about when you're next playing Opera Omnia. Anyways, thank you very much for joining me today. As I've said before, check out all of my social media links, particularly Twitch and Patreon, and of course don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and click on the bell for notifications. I shall see you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.